Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk on Access Humboldt. You're either listening to KZZH or watching us on Access Humboldt Channel 12. We have plenty to talk about tonight. Let's maybe first do a little bit of closure with regard to the impeachment trial, what happened, what the fallout is, and what the long-term consequences are for both parties. You want to start?
Well, what were there, seven, I believe, Republicans who sided with the Democrats to
Yes.
give them 57, which I guess was better than a lot of people thought. I still was holding out hope against hope that maybe there would be enough Republicans who would want to do the right thing and not let Trump get away with it, at least politically, so as to not set a precedent for future presidents. But, seven was more than some people thought there might be. The speech that McConnell made after he voted to acquit, saying that Trump was the one who did provoke the insurrection, in fact, and McConnell made the point that he is still liable to criminal prosecution or civil suits as well. So we'll see how that plays out. I have to admit that I was glad that the seven did vote with the Democrats. I was disappointed that there weren't more.
I agree. I am glad with that. I think that's actually a big deal. I think that's a story. I had no expectation that the conviction would happen, even if they brought in witnesses. And there's been some criticism of the managers for not pushing the witnesses, maybe caving because Graham, who apparently is the biggest ally right now for Trump, that he was threatening to bring in 100 witnesses, and that if they tried to shut him down, they would accuse him of it being a rigged process. Yeah. But I actually was pleasantly surprised by actually the additions of Burr and Toomey. Granted, they're retiring. So they don't, need the same pressure. We had, what's his name from Mississippi? I'm forgetting his name right now. But he was the first to switch. He voted for the constitutionality of it, and he got into a lot of trouble the first time. He's in a lot of trouble now with the Republican. Of course, we had Ben Sasse, Collins, Murkowski, and Romney. The only one facing re-election anytime soon is Murkowski, Romney in 2004. The others all just got reelected, and so they got 6 years to try to wade the storm. To ride the storm, pardon me. And so I actually was pleasantly surprised by having seven. My previous prediction was 5 to 10. I was hoping one or two more would join on. But the seven is a big deal. And I really was kind of disappointed that the press, their whole theme was, they failed, the acquittal failed. This was not about that. We've talked about in the last few shows. I mean, it would have been great if the conviction held, but to get 67 Republicans when Trump and Trumpism have such a stranglehold on the party was just an impossible thing to ask for. I hoped it would be more like 58, 59, but the seven shows that it's bipartisan. The Republicans turning on those seven right now, and they're doing censures in all of the states. They're talking about primaries. They're attacking them as well as the 10 in the House. It is really kind of lopsided right now because, as I think you brought up, one poll showed that 70% of Republicans support Trump. 75% in another poll said that he should play a large role in the party. They've got a problem. Because it's limited to the party. Independents and Democrats, it's completely the opposite. Yeah. And they've I think that the Republicans have a problem. And Graham is worried about 2022. We can talk a little bit about that because McConnell kind of pulled a little bit of a gutless thing where he voted against it. He said because he didn't think it was constitutional, which that had been decided earlier in the week. But he thought that he was legally and practically responsible, Trump that is, for what happened. Graham was threw a fit saying you've put a target on the Republicans running for re-election in 2022 may be true. I mean, because those 43 Republicans now have to spend the next 2 years, not to mention the rest of their lives, explaining their votes. And more information is going to come out. These trials are starting to happen, or well, the trials not yet, but the investigations and revealing of the prosecution. The House is going to put together a 9/11 type commission to investigate the situation. The article today suggested that the focus is going to be McCarthy's conversation with Trump, in which they got into a screaming match because McCarthy said, we're being invaded, and Trump's response was, well, I think the people there are care more about the election than you, and then issued one of his weak things of support your police, and we've discussed what Trump did in the hours following. There's no new revelations for that. I've got a few more comments about the trial, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But I'm going to let you jump in at this point.
Well, a couple of things. One, you mentioned the 70%. One of the recent polls I saw suggests that 70% of registered Republicans, and that's key, registered Republicans, still support Trump. The thing we need to keep in mind about that is that although those saying that they are registered Republicans by a percentage ticked up a bit after 2017 before the 2018 midterms to about 29%, it's fallen back a little bit since then. By some estimates, it's around 27%. So if you take 70% of that, you end up with, 19 or 20% of the electorate. So it seems to, and that's been relatively consistent through the Trump years. So I think we need to remind ourselves that it's only 19 to 20% of the electorate, but they are vocal, very vocal. They are engaged, and they are the activists right now within the Republican Party. So that's why we're dealing with what we're dealing with now, because that's where the energy is in the Republican Party right now. That's one thing. The other thing you mentioned that I think is very interesting that I've been following as well is Lindsey Graham and him threatening, we're going to call 100 witnesses, and one of the attorneys saying, I want all of those witnesses to come to me in person in Philadelphia, not online interviews, not depositions by Zoom. As an attorney, would you have called the bluff on that? Because here's why I ask. Who are they going to bring as witnesses? And who are they going to get? Because we already knew by that time through 60 some court cases that they had no evidence. Had they any evidence, they would have been presenting it in all of those court cases leading up to the impeachment that happened long before the impeachment, right? So we knew that they had no evidence. The Democrats could have put on some very good Republican witnesses like the Secretary of State of Georgia, et cetera. So would you have called Lindsey Graham's bluff on that?
It depends on if you're asking me as an attorney prosecuting that case or as a senator who is worried about getting things done, coronavirus bill and all of that. Because if it was just strictly that, I would have said, yeah, bring it on, no problem. But the question was whether or not this was going to drag out. Yeah. People are suffering. Economy, is starting to reopen because COVID is actually maybe, at least for the time being, on the wane. And so, and we have immigration reform and a lot of other things that have to get done. So the threat of having to go through even arguing about all of the witnesses as a senator, I would have to really think about it. As a prosecutor, I'd say, bring it. I mean, bring the people. One of the things he was threatening, and the guy who became the lead prosecutor, the Jewish guy who started out as lead prosecutor, seemed to be pushed aside by this grumpy guy named Van der Veen, and he was like saying, I've never been in a trial like this before. He commented, this is the worst day I've experienced I've had in Washington.
Yep.
really dumb thing to say, because one of the managers countered with, "Gee, I'm sorry to hear that. You know when our worst day was, you know." So it's just we had that, but he brought on and said, you know, you're falsifying evidence, you're pulling all of these shenanigans that would never be allowed in a trial in Philadelphia. He said that, Philadelphia, but quite frankly, you know, he's arguing about how it's not like a regular trial. A regular trial, you don't get to meet with three jurors to strategize the night before. You know, please. And that was Graham, Lee, and I forget who the other one was, all met to tell him how to present the case. And so you know, there's was a lot going on there. He obviously was Trump's choice because he talked about Trump. He talked about how the left and right organized this riot. He was perpetuating that, the Antifa, false flag myth. And then when Bernie submitted, when they're submitting questions, and Bernie submitted a question saying, "Do you support? Do you say whether Trump won or lost the election?" He basically says, "Who asked that?" And Bernie, real loud from up in his hand, said, "I did." And then there was an interaction that Leahy had to break up. And he was like saying, "Well, that's none of your business," you know. And it was just it got pretty intense, and mostly because that guy was just perennially grumpy.
Yeah.
Anyway, but that's what Trump wants.
Yeah, a follow-up on that. As we move past that, which was a political exercise, as you and I have talked about before, into cases that are going to be brought in some cases criminal, in some cases civil. What do you expect that we'll find out in the discovery phases of those procedures?
Well, see, and one of the interesting things here is that one of the things that Van der Veen brought up was the sergeant of arms saying that he didn't want to have more people in heavier garb because he didn't like the optics, right? The Democrats, once they were in, demanded his resignation immediately. He did fail. And so they want to blame everything on him, and they're threatening to bring this discussion. But I think that the optics was in deference to Trump. He didn't want to, Trump is having his rally, and he didn't want to be crossing Trump by making it look like Trump's supporters are really dangerous people. I think that is going to happen. There is going to be an investigation of what happened there, and we're going to get into a lot of detail. We saw that Ferguson, the officer who may have saved a bunch of senators' lives, it got the Congressional Gold Medal for his bravery and quick thinking in that. But we'll probably hear from some of them, but we're also going to hear from the Sergeant of Arms of the Senate and the House. So we're going to get into that. But the big thing is the McCarthy phone call, and they wanted to bring in a witness just for the one of the 10 House people who voted was a woman from Southwest Washington. That's a very right-wing area, by the way. I'm very well familiar with a lot of John Birchers in that area. When you're driving up I-5, there's this poster that you'll see that always has anti-UN and a lot of really goofy right-wing stuff on it. She overheard the McCarthy conversation. They wanted to bring her as a witness. That led to the big freak out. And the threat, they compromised on just accepting her statement, as was in the media. But we're going to, we do have this commission, they're going to be interviewed. She's going to be interviewed. McCarthy's going to be interviewed. Anybody who was anywhere near that will be interviewed. Question is will they have the guts to subpoena Trump and just to ask him what he remembers of that conversation?
Why wouldn't they? He's a private citizen now.
Yeah, I know, but they should. But he gets away with it and stuff. His lawyers throw up a fight, and the Democrats are going to have to hold him in contempt if they want him there.
But what about aside from the commission in Washington? Mm-hmm. What about attorneys in places like Atlanta and New York City? Should they subpoena Trump?
Well, the criminal investigation, they can't. He has a Fifth Amendment right to that. And in fact, now that I'm thinking about it, because there is a criminal investigation happening in Georgia and one in New York, his attorneys will probably just have a blanket Fifth Amendment. He's not saying anything to anybody about anything.
Shouldn't they subpoena him anyway to find out if he has a pocket pardon? In other words, the pardon that people think that he might have given himself in secret in the White House before leaving Washington.
I hadn't heard about that.
To force that question. There's speculation that he pardoned himself and everybody in his family before leaving Washington, and there's no requirement that that be made public until it's necessary. And so I'm wondering if the district attorney in Atlanta and the district attorney in Manhattan and the attorney general in New York are going to subpoena him just to force that question and find out whether he did that.
I don't know. That's a really interesting question. And then we'll find out what the legal effect of that is.
Exactly. That will put it to the test.
But if he did pardon himself, then he has no basis for refusing to cooperate.
There you go.
Yeah. So it'll be, boy, I had not heard about that. That's very interesting. I would assume President Biden would have access to that. One of the stories of the past week is that Biden does have access to all of the records of all of the conversations with Putin on the telephone. He actually, the Trump people actually tried to circumvent that, tried to actually shut that down, saying, no, you don't have a right to do that. We'll see. And we'll see what Biden actually takes advantage of and what gets revealed to the public. But so I would assume, okay, he doesn't have to tell the public, but I would assume Biden would be interested in that.
He will have access to those records of phone calls for which records were kept. One of the problems with Trump and Putin is that there were times, especially at international meetings, where they met and did not have anybody translating for Trump to take notes. So some of the information we've gotten over the years has actually come from Russian reporters. So I don't know if all the records for that exist. Yeah, he'll have access to it.
Yeah,
but I'm skeptical as to whether there are detailed records of the kind we would expect in normal times.
Yeah, that's right. It would just be a very basic summary, like the ones we've seen. And the interesting thing is Biden has really worked hard to avoid politics with Trump. Mm-hmm. He'll compare and contrast his policies, and I noticed Dr. Fauci's been doing that. I mean, he's just absolutely trashing Trump, right?
Yeah, right.
All over the place, but Biden is trying to stay above the fray. He didn't comment on the impeachment trial much. He's basically said whatever the DOJ wants with regard to charges, that's up to them. He's going to stay out of it, as, by the way, should be the case. I mean, and so he may not even want to get into all of that unless there's a concrete reason to. Now, he's not undoing everything Trump did, by the way. He's so far he's played it cool with regard to the tariffs against China, wanting to look at them individually. We have to acknowledge that Trump's son or son-in-law did a pretty good job over the Middle East, getting those agreements between a few Arab countries and Israel. He can build. He's planning to build on that. Obviously, not undo any of that, and a few other things that he's going to maintain. So he's not really playing politics everywhere to trash him and everything. He is going to undo. He's trying to undo the Iranian situation. He's got to undo a lot of damage there. But we haven't, with regard to, we haven't heard anything with regard to North Korea.
Right. Yeah. The one thing about the Middle East, I hope, you're right. I do hope that Biden follows up on some of the things that were done with regard to Middle East peace. I hope, though, that the Biden administration will be more inclusive of the Palestinian voice in future negotiations, which the Trump administration ignored. And I really don't think that anyone who's been watching that situation over the last many decades thinks that you can make the kind of progress that's necessary for a lasting peace without the Palestinians' involvement. So I hope that, and I'm sure they will, include the Palestinians in a much bigger role. And so we'll see.
And unfortunately, I don't think Biden is going to reverse Trump's decision about the embassy being in Jerusalem, move it back to Tel Aviv.
Right.
I wish he would, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen.
Yeah, maybe that would be something down the line after they get a little further along. I don't know, but you're right. It may not happen.
I mean, I do think Biden is going to use the pressure. Netanyahu, is in a lot of trouble right now. He walked out of the courtroom if he doesn't like the way it's coming down. So, there's going to be some openings there, and hopefully Biden, does bring the Palestinians back into the discussion, and and maybe there's some hope there, especially if Israel can shake Netanyahu.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so we're talking about also, what's going on in Afghanistan, and I mean, there's a lot of foreign policy issues that Biden has to really play it cool with. What's happening in Russia with Navalny, and Myanmar. He's got a real a challenge there because that is military coup that probably should have been predicted, and the rest. So he's got a lot on his plate in terms of that, but he's playing it cool. I have to say he's not issuing any threats, and the rest. The situation in Haiti, I mean there's also actually, as I'm thinking about it, Central America. I mean there's a lot. To consider.
Yeah, climate change and everything else. One thing I would like to ask you about before we move on from some of that, what's your analysis of the Navalny situation in Russia? If you were the American administration, and you see the thousands and tens of thousands of Russians in the streets, all taking a risk, by the way, protesting in Putin's Russia, would you see this as an opportunity? Because it's already gotten approval to redo the Russian constitution to leave him in power until 2036, I think. This seems to be one of the more virulent protests against Putin that I can remember. Maybe there have been others that have been worse, but I think this is one of the ones that seems to have some momentum. So, and we may not know about what's going on because obviously some of those operations would be classified, but would you see this as an opportunity to try to drive a wedge between the Russian people and the Putin regime?
I just don't know what's possible there. This is one of those situations where I don't really have a clear idea of what's happening. I know there's been massive roots of resistance there, but and it comes from different sectors. Navalny isn't exactly a progressive guy. He's a politician, and he's played to kind of some strange nationalist basis as well as to what would be called the left. So I don't know how much they really want to get behind this guy. I don't know what the future is. I don't know what the tools are for that. I imagine right now they're in a position of gathering information because probably, there's not a whole lot of intelligence that had been gathered over the last 4 years, or at least, not at the direction of the administration. So, for me, I have to say wait and see before I have any clue as to how to address that. I don't know. I'm not in my 20s anymore where I can reduce, things to, you got U.S. imperialist hegemony, and you've got, everybody else. Russia is not a third world country. It's, I guess in some ways you could say it is, but it's, as to what those demonstrations represent, as to how, deep it runs with the Russian people, as to what Putin's support is. The only thing that tells me that there probably potentially is a lot of support is the fact that the regime is coming down on these demonstrations, mass arrests, and trying to shut it down. And
Right.
that tells me that there's something there, but I have not read up enough on it to really know on that. I just to have a strong opinion. I'm just glad that Trump is not in office right now. That's the only thing I can say about it.
Right. For sure. For sure.
But anyway, I mean, foreign policy is all of a sudden out there. Biden's walking right into a bunch of challenges right now, and we're looking at that. But and so far, not a lot of blustering. Not there. I'm really not too disappointed with the foreign policy yet. I'm having a few disappointments here and disagreements with Biden. I'm hoping he doesn't cave on. Well, it looks like he's already not wanting to really give the student loan forgiveness a chance. Whether or not that's due to lobbyists or due to economic advice. But I'm a little disappointed in that night, and I'm a little disappointed that he seems to be showing signs of caving on the $15 minimum wage. Yep. But people in the House and Senate aren't caving on that. Bernie is going to push that completely. And Bernie and Elizabeth Warren do have Biden's ear. So we'll see what happens. There's not a whole lot of news about what's happening with the COVID bill right now. I was kind of looking for it before tonight, other than it's happening. I mean, they still haven't put it together as to what they're going to propose. Part of I think the problem with the wage is whether or not that can fit into reconciliation. If they have to go without the Republicans, that's a process that's limited to budget issues. Is a change of law with regard to the minimum wage, can that be construed as a budget issue? And part of it is Sinema and Manchin.
Well, how can it not be considered part of the budget? Because that affects federal workers, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the criteria is there. I'm not a real student of reconciliation as, a way to do it. I know they can do it only like twice a year, but it's a way you can bypass through the Senate rules the filibuster, but it has to be strictly budget items, and to actually pass the federal minimum wage law may not be considered budget, even though it affects the budget. I just don't know. But again, you're going to need those 50 Democrats with Harris as a tiebreak, and there's some problems with two of them.
Well, I still don't understand Republican, especially current Republican opposition to a $15 minimum wage, because as we've seen, the Republican base, there are a lot of folks in the Republican base who would benefit from that. And, I would think that would be something that even Republicans would say, wow, that's a pretty good idea. I can see how I might benefit from that. Because some of my constituents will, especially in places like Mississippi and West Virginia and Alabama and on and on and on. So, but I think, as I believe we talked about last week, there's a good chance that if that does not make it into the bill we're talking about, it could be introduced in a separate bill at some point. I think with regard to the coronavirus bill, unfortunately, I think the nature of politicians in Washington is to find out what their deadline is and go all the way up to the deadline. And the deadline is the 14th of March because of some expiration dates with regard to unemployment compensation and so on. And so I would not be surprised if they go up to 11:59 p.m. on March the 13th before they make a decision, because sometimes a deadline has to force them to do their job. But we'll see. I would hope they would get it done long before that, because people needed it yesterday and the day before and the day before. But I don't hold out any hope until the 13th of March.
I don't know. One of the reports this morning that came out is that consumption and in terms of the economy actually went up in January, because of the $600 payments in large part. And if there's any indication that that's starting to slow down, there might be some pressure put on them that they've got to speed that up, because they really should not be waiting till March to do this. They're going to lose the momentum that the first one came if they don't get those $1,400 checks out there, and that is a big risk. There needs to be maybe more pressure put on them. People should be calling their congressman to say, what is happening with the coronavirus bill? I'd like to see news about it every day. Right.
Yeah.
And I can understand we've had the impeachment trial and some of the fallout from it. But that should be the headline discussion every day. And I went to The Hill, I went to Politico, I went to Huffington Post, I went to the C-SPAN, I went to where you get information on Washington. There's almost nothing about where it is in terms of what's being negotiated or what's happening. And I think the media has dropped the ball on that. But I think today's report on the consumer spending in January really needs to be an impetus to say, okay, do not lose. You cannot afford to lose that momentum. We're starting to pull out of it. We have big drop in infection rates of COVID. Things are starting to open up. There's plans to open up here in California. The CDC is talking about reopening schools to 5 days before the end of the year. And maybe reopening restaurants and the like. If this is going to happen, there needs to be some money in consumer hands, because we still have huge unemployment. I think it will be a disaster if they wait till March.
Yeah, common sense is on your side. Unfortunately, the energy in the Republican Party is focused on not doing anything at all with any Democratic-generated idea. Because the energy in the Republican Party right now is not about policy. It's about us versus them. And so for the Democrats, if they want to try to do this on their own, they need to be talking to Joe Manchin and, a couple of the Democrats who are kind of on the fence about this and not really knowing what to do. So because I just don't see Republicans, given where the energy in that party is right now, doing anything as far as cooperation goes.
I'm sort of hoping that maybe a couple of those 7 will do it. Maybe Romney and Collins. I mean, Collins, she's got 6 years, but she's not in the blue state. Pardon me, a red state. She's in a purple state that leans blue. So it's maybe some pressure on them to actually, get something done there would be to help, and they don't need Manchin. And say then Sinema and Manchin can do whatever it is they feel like they need to do, but they need to put some pressure on them. Granted, are they going to buck the Republicans on this? But one of the things Trump attacked McConnell for, and I don't know if we've discussed this yet, but McConnell afterwards, even though he had a gutless no vote because which he used procedure as an excuse, he gave a speech saying that Trump was practically and legally responsible. It just wasn't up to the Senate to do that. Trump attacked him as a dour, humorless.
I have a quote.
Go for it.
I thought this might come up. This is what Trump said, quote, or at least his statement. Mitch is a dour, sullen, and unsmiling political hack.
Yeah. So, and I don't remember exactly where I was going with that, but he, there's a lot of pressure. Well, one of the criticisms, I know where it's going, was he blames McConnell for losing the Senate, because McConnell is angry, thinks that the phone call to Georgia lost the Senate. Right. Trump is blaming McConnell for losing the Senate by blocking the $2,000 payments. I think they're both right, actually. If one of those things hadn't happened, they possibly could have retained the Senate. But the key here is that Trump is still pushing those $2,000 thing, and the Democrats really need to use that. They could pressure, I think, some Republicans on that issue. Unfortunately, the 7 are probably not going to, be pressured by Trump supporters at this point. I don't know, maybe, but it's just that, I don't know, maybe that would be where they would do the break. But I think the Democrats really need to, just like they're planning to use McConnell's speech in the 2022 cycle for the Senate races, they should use that part of his attack, not the dour sullen part, but the $2,000 right now. That should be, hey, your own leader says you need to do this. So I don't know, and maybe they can get a few senators.
Yeah. All right. Let me throw a curveball here. Let's remember Mitch McConnell's statement after the vote, where he did, as you say, blamed Trump and basically said Trump was guilty. Mm-hmm. There's that. And then not too long after that, Lindsey Graham went on the air on Fox saying that, we're never going to win without Trump. We should tamp down any kind of talk that Trump was responsible for this. That's already been decided upon during the impeachment trial. I think, and this is the curveball, what do you think? What Lindsey Graham was saying there was aimed at Mitch McConnell as a way of, without naming him, as a way of saying to Mitch McConnell, you need to tamp down criticism about Trump because we still need him, whereas McConnell was trying to move forward away from Trump. Is that how you read it?
I do. I absolutely. First of all, Graham is just, he knows he can't win without Trump's support in South Carolina. He's got 6 years to work it over, but he knows that he's completely dependent on Trump at this point. There's no independence from Trump coming from him, which is why I think that Democrats should pressure him on the $1,400 payments, and the rest maybe vote for the COVID bill. But he'll use the blue state bailout as an excuse to not support it. He'll say, "Oh, I can support that and do that." But yeah, no, I think that there is that calculus. I think that I'm going to wait for my prediction to talk a little bit more about how the dynamics in the Republican Party are going to play out, because I think McConnell is thinking a little bit more longer term than yes. Graham and it is.
That's exactly what's going on. I don't want to step on your future prediction sure. here in a few minutes, but I think that's exactly how I read it as well. I think Graham's comments following the impeachment trial were directed at Mitch McConnell without a doubt, even though he never mentioned his name. But without a doubt, it was directed at Mitch McConnell, which helps us define. It helps us define the lines within the Republican conference right now, because there clearly is vast disagreement on what the next best move is for the Republican Party, illustrated by what McConnell said and what Lindsey Graham said in response. So, I mean, that really delineates what's going on inside the Republican Party, and they have a decision to make. And as you say, McConnell is looking long-term, Lindsey Graham is looking short-term. So which way do they go? And I don't see how they can split that. I don't see how you can sort of go along with Trump, because he's not a sort of kind of guy. You're either with the insurrection or you're opposed to it. There's no middle ground there. So I don't see any way to reconcile Graham and McConnell right now.
No, and especially now I've remembered the other names of the three who met with the prosecutors. I'm calling them the Trump Trinity. You've got Cruz, you've got Johnson, and you've got Graham. All of them are not in deep red states. All of them are in battleground states that are become more and more battleground. Ron Johnson, I think, isn't particularly freaking out because in Wisconsin, he's particularly vulnerable. I actually think, and that's why he is livid, absolutely livid with McConnell for making that speech, because it just totally, completely undermines him, because he's going to be put on the defensive. McConnell's speech will be used against Johnson in Wisconsin. And unless there's some major sea change in Wisconsin and with national politics, I think Johnson's going to lose. I'm not, that's too far away cheating for my prediction. But
let me add one thing to that. I think you're spot on right, and Ron Johnson is a perfect example to use. Not only will McConnell's speech post impeachment be used against people like Ron Johnson, but my view is there's going to be a lot of stuff coming out in discovery in Georgia and in New York and maybe in other places we don't even know about yet that will also be used that did not come up in the impeachment trial. And we don't know what all that information is yet, and we don't know how detailed it is, and we don't know how harmful to the Republican side it is. So Ron Johnson is in a tough situation now, just with what McConnell said. He may be even further backed up into a corner once we start hearing what is coming out in discovery during some of these trials that are going to be happening at some point soon, certainly long before some of those folks are up for re-election.
And another thing that's going to happen, and maybe there's nothing to it, maybe it's all just rumor, but we heard about these tours, that happened a few days before the insurrection. Right. And that were given by House members and possibly even a senator, possibly Hawley, right?
Right.
And so we need to kind of look at that and anticipate. This is the news is not going to get good for Republicans, not for the 43 people who voted for it. What you'll hear increasingly is they're going to say, well, it was a process. I didn't think that Trump was innocent. It's the process, but it's just not good. I think they're going to be on the defensive. And yeah, Ron Johnson is in trouble. Hawley is probably going to be fine in Missouri, at least for now. But, but other people, Cruz, by the time he comes up again, it's going to be a very different Texas.
Yes, it will. Maybe the power will be back on by then in Texas.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we didn't even. We could talk a little bit about that. The governor blaming it on wind power, and I guess the mayor had to resign because he was calling all of his constituents whiners for calling him up about the power being out, and the rest. This is. And there have been all kinds of online jokes about the cold, saying, putting on a jacket, I'm not going to put on a jacket, right? Because it's my freedom to not put on a jacket. I'm going to go outside. They can't tell me not to go outside. And by the way, more people die of cancer than freezing. It's just, it's going on. But that's, what's happening in Texas, I don't want to make light of it because it is serious and people probably are going to die because of it. Friends of mine in Nebraska, they can't get their house any warmer than 54 right now. Yeah. So it's it is an issue. But I didn't want to get sidetracked there. But I think you got to look at the people that are in trouble now. A lot of the people in the deep red states are just not going to buck it because they do not want to get in trouble with the Trump voters or make any kind of waves. And there won't be a big backlash against them. I mean, Liz Cheney's whatever else you want to think of her politics, that was a brave stand for her to take. McCarthy did keep her from losing her position, but even that was just gutless. McCarthy, I think, is coming out of this as a very weak leader because he's at the center of it. He's going to be at the center of the investigation, and he ought to be angrily talking about it. He should have been there on making speeches on the floor about how Trump, was told him that when he was complaining about the invasion of the Capitol building, Trump said, "Well, apparently they care more about the election than you do." I mean, that just is absolutely, and he's not denying it. He's not denying that that's what was said. And yet he's just so weak, he can't make even a comment about it. They had to bring in a witness who overheard him because nobody wanted to try to drag him in to embarrass him, but he needs to be embarrassed. Anyway, I'm kind of going off on different stuff. We keep getting back to that topic.
I think you're right. When a politician cannot even make a common sense response to something like that, the party is in trouble. That should have been an easy one, right? Yeah. That was a softball pitch, but and he still couldn't do it. So It says a lot about his district, first of all, and it probably is an indication that he's the type of person who makes only the political calculation and no other calculation at all. Otherwise, that would have been an easy one.
Yeah, I know. I mean, he doesn't want to be the one that chased Cheney out, so he pulled a little bit of strings there. But that was, again, just gutless. I mean, take a stand, one way or the other. It just anyway. I think
you're under the kind of pressure they're under, though. I think is also exemplified by a comment from a Republican operative in Pennsylvania who was talking about Senator Toomey, who said, "We did not send him to Washington to do the right thing."
Right.
And I thought that's about as low as you can get.
No, it is. And that was a comment from the chairman of the party.
Yeah.
And in Pennsylvania, which to talk a little bit in the little bit of time we have left, because Toomey is retiring and Burr is retiring. That's North Carolina and Pennsylvania. They're looking for a Sherrod Brown type to run as a Democrat in Pennsylvania. Rumors, in fact, Graham has basically said Lara Trump is probably going to be the next Senator Lara, however you say her name, is in North Carolina. I doubt it. But what do you think is going to happen there?
Well, there's a lot being talked about in North Carolina about that race right now. There is a state Supreme Court justice who I think the Democrats might be able to get behind and support statewide. It's a female Supreme Court justice, state Supreme Court justice, who a lot of Democrats are excited about. The unknown, the complete unknown, is of course how the Trump name is going to play. Going forward, when they've been out of the news a little bit, and when you're faced with somebody who has no political experience and hasn't been in the state in a long time, is the Trump name alone enough currency to win a statewide election when, the urban areas in that state, like all other urban areas, trend Democratic? Will the Trump name, with someone who's never been in politics before, carry enough weight in the rural areas to run up the score in the rural areas enough? We don't know. That may be the test case.
Well, Trump is, of course, returning to the public after Rush Limbaugh passed away. That comes at the end of a legacy. He's the one who basically started Anger Radio. I mean, there was some before, but he really brought it to an art, I think, that is affected, it was set as a model for sort of the right-wing politics of anger and trauma that characterizes conservatism over the past 30 years. And Trump is capitalizing on that, and is actually going on tour to promote, well, his fund. Since the 6th, he's raised $27 million in his legal defense fund. I mean, there's just, P.T. Barnum was right. But you want to comment on what Rush represented?
Yeah, a little bit, of course. Well, a lot of people in this state knew of Rush Limbaugh before he was a national broadcaster, because he was in Sacramento. But my recollection is that Rush became nationally syndicated around 1987, about the time that Reagan got rid of the Fairness Doctrine. And I think you can argue that Rush Limbaugh created the framework for grievance and anger and hate broadcasting. You're right. There was some of that before, no doubt about it. But I think given the timing around 1987, he was, depending upon how you look at it, the right person at the right time or the wrong person at the wrong time, depending upon what your views are. But there was no doubt that he was the trailblazer for things that happened afterwards, like Fox News and like Donald Trump, Newsmax and OAN and all the rest. Because one of the reasons for it was, if you think about the late 80s, that was, going on 20 years, almost 15, 20 years after the emergence of FM radio, and AM radio was hurting. at the time financially. And so when AM radio stations started seeing that Rush Limbaugh could bring in a huge audience, then, right-wing talk radio found a home on AM radio starting in about 1987. And so Rush ushered in that whole phenomenon. And, it was, anybody who knows Rush Limbaugh, it was grievance and anger.
I just have one quick anecdote about it. First time I ever listened to him was the Friday before the 1992 elections. I had a long drive, and a friend of mine said, "Yeah, you won't like his politics, but he is funny." And on that show, Friday before 1992, Ollie North was his guest, guaranteeing a Bush win over Clinton. And so when I got back and told my friend, "Yeah, that was really funny." Anyway. We are at the time of our show where it is time for predictions. Chuck, what's your prediction?
Well, I wish I could figure out a way to make this sound positive, but I really can't. My prediction, all the reading I've been doing over the last, however many months with this whole Trump thing, right now, today, I am of the opinion that impeachment is going to become a regular feature of our politics, at least as far out into the future as I can see. I think that if the Republicans win the House in 2022, and the Democrats lost seats in 20, so if the Republicans are able to figure out a strategy that wins the House in 2022, I think job number one for them, as far as they see it, is to impeach Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Now, they're not going to be removed from office. But the fact that they would be even considering that, and some of them already are, I think tells you how much work we have to do politically and socially in this country. But I think as of right now, I think we can look forward to the fact that impeachment is going to be a feature of our politics for the foreseeable future. It's not going to be rare anymore.
I agree, although I actually don't think that the Republicans are going to retake either.
Well, I hope not, but the way things go, as quickly as things can change these days, I'm already encouraging people to stay tuned and be active, be aware now, because that's just next year. That election is next year.
Well, here you go. Here's some optimism for you, because I actually think that even if the coronavirus bill is late, we are starting to climb out of it. The vaccines are getting out there. We do have now a national program of distribution having a big effect. 100,000 vaccines were given out in Disneyland through that program. The state finally had its act together to bypass local health care. So with that, the economy is also going to improve. We'll probably get a boost from the coronavirus bill. I think in a couple of months, you're going to be looking at a very different political climate. And I think it will cut into Trumpism. And I think it's going to, I do believe, as I said before, that the recall election is going to happen. And I think it will be crushed because of the political climate that will be created by the optimism coming with an economic expansion. And I think it's very likely, granted, it's a long ways away, to carry into the 1992 elections. And I think at least in the Senate level, Democrats are likely to expand, probably in North Carolina and Pennsylvania and possibly elsewhere. That's one of my more optimistic things. We'll see. Who knows?
I was just going to say, Mr. Optimism. Yeah, well done. Thank you. I needed optimism. Thanks.
All right. You've been listening to Redwood Wonk on Access Humboldt. We will be back next week. There'll be hopefully with some more COVID bill news. I'm going to be looking for it. But you listen to us on the radio and on television. Until next time.